Louis C.K. was canceled, and now he's headlining Netflix's comedy special, which makes me wonder, if you've been canceled, how do you uncancel yourself? What's the control Z of your life? For those of us that have run afoul of public sentiment, what hope of redemption is there? So my reading of the Master and Margarita is of a revenge fantasy by someone who has been canceled by the public, though cancellation in Bulgakov's time was different than it is now. But the idea is still the same. If you do something against the dominant ideology of the time, then your career is forfeit. Now, what we cancel people for before could now seem ludicrous, but I'm sure that future generations are going to look back at our times and think of them as ludicrous as well, because every generation thinks that they've figured things out and that all other generations are wrong, and few have the humility to actually see that. So I just finished this Master Margarita, and I gotta say, I'm mightily disappointed. So it's part of a book club that I'm in, the same one that I read For the Stranger, and I was actually excited about this book. Here in Portugal, I actually know more Russian people than Portuguese people, and I've heard this book spoken of very fondly. It involves a devil and it has Russian magical realism. And I loved 100 Years of Solitude, and so magical realism really puts a tingle in my dingle. So this seemed like a potentially great read. So I'll summarize some ideas here before I get into the meat and potatoes of my point. The central figure of this book, if you had to pick one, you could say is the master, as everything revolves around him. He wrote a book about Pontius Pilate, and the dominant literary circle at the time denounced the book and denounced him as Stalinist Russia is intentionally godless, and they want to promote the disproof of Christianity rather than any kind of support of it. And so the master runs afoul of public sentiment, and he gets canceled for it. And then a beautiful, rich, married woman falls in love with him for some reason, I don't know what, because the book doesn't really make their dynamic clear. The master mostly just whinges in his dark and artsy moods, and she's his beautiful, adoring, loving caretaker for some reason. Satan and his crew then come to Moscow, and they torment and torture all of the people who have canceled the master, and then they offer the master and his caretaker not heaven, but eternal peace, because Jesus liked the master's book. And there you go. That's the story in a nutshell. Now, what's interesting here and what I find funny is how closely this relates to the author's life. He also was canceled in Stalinist Russia, and he, just like the master, wrote a book and tried to burn the manuscript, and he too was saved by a woman who adored him and took care of him. Now, there's definitely an autobiographical element to this book, without a doubt, but by God, it's just so corny, because my first issue here is that the master is considered a master, and his name is the Master, but I don't really see any examples of his mastery. His story about Pontius Pilate was okay, but it wasn't masterful. It's doing what many contemporary writers are now doing and reimagining classic stories, but through the perspectives of the marginalized, like James by Percival Everett or the Mersal Investigation by Kamel Daoud. Don't know, I've never said his name out loud. All of these support counter-ideological retellings of stories, be it either from a feminist or a racial or a post-colonial angle. And so I don't really see the master as a genius that has been suppressed by society as much as someone that just wrote outdated material that didn't really land with the times. It's fine. Stalinist Russia was post-Christianity. Imagine now somebody trying to write a book that's sympathetic to Hitler or to a billionaire or to transphobia. It just wouldn't fly in literary circles. It would get no support, no matter how masterfully it's written. People don't want art. They want ideological conformity. Now, you could say in the case of the Master and Margarita that it's different, because in Bulgakov's time, it was the government. They did the suppression, while now it's the public that chooses who gets platformed or not. And I say, tomato, tomato. It's just cancellation with extra steps. You have to conform or you die. Write what's trendy and acceptable, or be damned. I'm reminded of American Fiction, a absolutely great movie where a brilliant black author writes a subtle masterpiece that nobody gives a shit about. But when he's in a drunken rage, he writes some generic pop slop, the trauma-truffling, suffering porn that wins all the oppression Olympic awards nowadays, that makes middle-aged white women feel less bad about their intergenerational guilt. And then he gets very rewarded from it. He doesn't feel too good about it. But it's still the same message. Don't hate the players, hate the game. Bulgakov, though, is uncomfortable with being canceled. Because, of course, it sucks. So sucks. And so he does this kind of time shelter trick by saying, nah, it's this era that sucks. Let's go back to what was before. And so you can't cancel me because in the good old days, I was right. And in this case, Russia is post-Christian, and so Bulgakov doubles down and Christianizes harder by having the supernatural forces of good and evil be his Justice League to beat up the bad guys. But who are the bad guys in the end? And they're not really given much interiority. They too could be struggling to get by in a fucked up system, like I'm sure many of you are as well. And just because they're thriving, it doesn't mean that they're complicit. Of course, what I'm saying here is super not trendy either, and it's very cool in the literary and art world to complain about the system that you're in. Yeah, I know. Capitalism bad and billionaires evil. I got it. Let's all just go back to the forest and to the Garden of Eden where we could run around naked and eat everything except for apples. Now, what makes this book special, though, is this kind of wish fulfillment of torturing opportunistic bureaucrats. Now, when people talk about the book, nobody talks about the Pontius Pilate story or about the Master's mastery. Yeah, no one cares about that. It's all about the torture. The book isn't the Master and Margarita, it's the devil and his homies. It's all about driving these people insane, of taking their goods, of destroying their homes, of deceiving them and making them fear for their lives. And it's understandable why this book took off when it did. It was published more than 20 years after Bulgakov died, and it was the first of its kind to be so openly critical about the Soviet bureaucratic system, or at least the most popular one that I know of. I don't think that this is something that Bulgakov could have published in his lifetime without being permanently canceled, if you can tolerate this horrible Russian accent. How did I not perfect this yet? I don't know. But it was published 20 years after his death, after copies of the book have been circulating in these small private circles. And so the time was ripe. It was great commentary for what Russia was like back then. But now, though, is it still as interesting? Is it still as revolutionary? I don't know. What it is a very visually stimulating book. It's very hyper vivid. It's actually Harry Potter's favorite book, according to the cover sleeve. My favorite novel. It's just the greatest explosion of imagination, craziness, satire, humor, and heart. Sincerely, Harry Potter. But I don't really find it compelling. As someone who has personally been thoroughly canceled, I don't think I have the opportunity of Louis C.K. to go back to my previous shtick, which was loud gluttony. Nor can I have this final wish fulfillment of Pontius Pilate, waiting patiently until someone comes and tells my story with compassion and empathy, after which I could be freed from negative sentiment and redeemed. No. Once canceled, the damage just can't be undone, as people still don't think all too kindly of Pontius Pilate 60 years after the Master and Margarita's publication. And so I saw this book as a bit too egoic, and I so read myself in the position of Bulgakov and the Master in those moments when I think that it's time for me to stop reading books and to finally write one of my own. How tempting it would be for me to write something like this as well. And so I feel some strong ick towards this book. Of course, very much based on projection and not what the book says about itself. But then again, as we saw in Rita Felsky's work, which I reviewed before, we don't uncover any truths about the book, but simply find ways to project our own meanings onto it. So those are my thoughts on the Master and Margarita, all of which I was able to put together with the help of the ReadingRate app, which is where I gather all of my ideas in reading. Please check it out. It's a super cool app. I love it. I can't just improvise my thoughts on camera. I'm not that bright. I am reading off of a teleprompter right now. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you in my next video, whenever that is. I'm heading to Canada for a couple of weeks, And so I don't think I'm going to be able to fill in there. But I will keep on reading. All right, that's it. Bye-bye.